On this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly, let's read Electronic Gaming Monthly issue 4 from November of 1989. So today we're reading a very early issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly. This is issue number 4 from November of 1989, and this was a very exciting time to be a gamer. Within the span of less than 2 months, you had the launch of the Nintendo Game Boy, the NEC TurboGrafx 16, the Sega Genesis, and the Atari Lynx. And that's part of the reason I chose this issue, is that it has some coverage of both TurboGrafx 16 and Sega Genesis launch titles. And also just because, as you can see, Ghouls N Ghosts is the cover story. And that is certainly one of my all-time favorite games. You've also got over 25 reviews and previews for games like Thunder Force 2, Blazing Lasers, Bad Dudes, and Ninja Gaiden 2. Oh, as well as the first look at 16-bit Super Mario World. Here on the inside cover, we have a 2-page ad for Jaleco's Robo Warrior, and although this game was published by Jaleco, it was actually developed by Hudson Soft, and is considered, at least by some, to be a spin-off of the Bomberman series. I don't see what's spin-offy about it. The character that you control is like a Robo Warrior. He's a robot, and he does walk around, like you have an overhead view, and he walks around dropping bombs. In this case, to blow up bushes, looking for both the exit to each level and for batteries, because he's a robot, so he's battery powered. But other than that, the game to me doesn't play that much like Bomberman as far as your objectives and whatnot. But that being said, like, to describe this game to somebody, I think makes it sound like it's not a very exciting game. But I don't know. I have a lot of fun playing it. Like, whenever I play it, it makes me want to play it more. Like, why don't I play this game more often? Kind of a weird ad in that it has absolutely no screenshots. And for a 2-page spread, that seems kind of weird. Next page, we have the table of contents here on the left. And on the right, we have a Capcom ad for Mega Man 2 and Strider. And I think at this point, these are both games that I've talked about on the show extensively. So, Mega Man 2 is, most people's favorite Mega Man game. And, whether it's yours or not, there's really no denying the game's greatness. And then the other game over here, Strider, and again, I've said this before, but this game is not in any way a port or home conversion of the Strider arcade game. It's a completely new game. It's still a side-scrolling action game. You still have the same, main character of Strider with like that. I forgot what his weapon is called exactly. Some kind of like light sword or lightsaber. Well, lightsaber would be Star Wars, but whatever it is. But other than that, it's a completely different game. And at least in my opinion, it's a more fun game to play than the arcade original or the arcade port on the Genesis. Over here, we have the letter from the editor, Steve Harris. And as you can see here, he's saying, you asked for it, you got it, more Sega. And, partially that's because the Genesis had launched, so it's got nothing to do with any editorial decisions that he made. But, at this time, Sega was also still supporting the Master System, of course, because the Genesis had just come out. And so he's just talking about how there's going to be, quite a bit of coverage of both Genesis and Master System, which is nice. Over here, we have just a single-page ad for the Power Glove. And I say single-page just because in some magazines you saw these big multi-page ads for it. Some letters to the editor over here, kind of a lot of silly questions. Somebody in here was asking if they can play their Sega Master System card games in their TurboGrafx 16, which, I don't know. Somebody else over here giving them a hard time for giving Reggie Jackson Baseball on the Sega Master System a bad review. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then over here is an ad for Data East's Bad Dudes. And it's kind of a cool ad, actually. They're trying to compare the game to Double Dragon, which is kind of funny because I don't think that That's a real direct comparison. But anyway, here they're showing arcade screenshots, Nintendo screenshots, Amiga screenshots of Bad Dudes versus Double Dragon. And I only think it's funny because if you actually look at the screenshots, I don't really see how it looks that much better than Double Dragon. I mean, I'd personally rather play Double Dragon. And then down here, you've got the Apple II and the Atari ST, and then no screenshot over here, ostensibly because Double Dragon did not come out on those platforms. Next page, we get straight into the reviews, and they seem to have the reviews grouped together by platform because all of the games on this first page are NES reviews. The first one over here is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I've talked about this before. I understand that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a beloved game for a lot of people. When I was growing up, when I was 11 or 12 years old, I was a huge fan of the TMNT cartoon. I used to watch it every morning before school. And, so if anybody was going to be, into this game, I would think it would have been me. My best friend got it, and I would play it over at his house and watch him play it. And the game has just never clicked with me. Like, if it's a favorite game of your childhood, then, that's awesome. But I don't think it's horrible or anything. But to me, at least, it seems like kind of disappointing for a Konami game. I would have thought it would have been a little bit better. Then next to that, you have the review of Bad Dudes. And, I'll admit I haven't played a ton of Bad Dudes, but what I have played of it doesn't make me want to play more Bad Dudes. Like, the idea that that game was somehow in the same league as Double Dragon, which itself is not that great of a game on the NES, is a little bit laughable for me. Like, I think I've played the first 2 levels of the game, and it just didn't make me want to play the game anymore. Next to that is a review of Sky Shark, and this is a Toaplan arcade shooter, and you can't really call it the prequel, but Fire Shark on the Mega Drive and Genesis, which was also an arcade game, was like the sequel or follow-up to Sky Shark. It's an okay game. I can't remember if there's 2 or 3 NES shooters that get coverage in this magazine, and I don't know what it is. It seems like, for the most part, NES shooters just feel like really unpolished and not very good. Like, I don't know what Konami was doing that Gradius and Life Force were so good on the NES, because those games are both great. But most other shooters that I've played on the NES are just, for me, not that great. And I mean, this one gets 2 6s and 2 5s, so I mean, I guess that's semi-okay. I should say that in these early issues of EGM, if something got a 5 or a 6, that seems like it's pretty average. Like, if you actually read the text of the review, they're not bashing it if it got a 5. Next to that is Defender of the Crown, and that's kind of an interesting one because this started out on the Amiga, and Defender of the Crown is probably one of the most beloved games on the Amiga and probably one of the best-selling games. It was developed by Cinemaware, who also did the TV sports games on the TurboGrafx 16. But it's funny because one of the things that the game was praised for on the Amiga were its great graphics. But if you play the NES version, it has horrible graphics and it doesn't control well. So I'm actually surprised that 2 of the reviewers gave it a 7. It seemed like Steve and Ed both, had that game's number a little bit more. And then next to that is Strider, which I mentioned on a previous page. You can see that game actually gets the best scores of any of the games on the page. And at least in my opinion, it's well deserved. Moving on to the next page, we move on to different consoles. One of the things that's interesting about the reviews in at least these early issues of EGM, I don't remember how it was later, is they don't tell you anywhere what system the games are for. And maybe they just figured that everybody would know that if they were reading this. But, up here in this little info box, you have the type or genre, which that should be there, the release date. But then after that, you have levels of play and difficulty. And a lot of the games, like levels of play was not really applicable. So why is that even there? You would think they would just put, like NES or Genesis, or they generally just referred to Master System games as Sega. But I don't know, you would have thought they would have done that. But anyway, there's only one Sega Master System game being reviewed here, and that is Spellcaster. And I very briefly mentioned Spellcaster in my Genesis in 1989 video, because Mystic Defender on the Genesis was the follow-up to Spellcaster, which is kind of funny because Mystic Defender came out only a few months after this one, but I'm assuming that this game came out earlier on the Master System in other territories. It's an okay game. It's a side-scrolling action game. You play, like, I don't know if he's like a warlock or a wizard or whatever, but he has a lot of different spells he can cast as offensive magic. And it's all right. Next to that, though, we have two TurboGrafx 16 launch games, Victory Run and Dungeon Explorer. Victory Run, so you see it gets a 6, an 8, a 7, and an 8. This is a game I feel like I often now see getting a lot of hate on the internet, whether it's on YouTube or text reviews, talking about like how bad it is. And for sure, there's not too much reason to go and play Victory Run now, but if I play it now and try to put myself in the mindset of somebody playing the game in 1989, it seems like it was kind of an advanced racing game. It is based on the Paris-Dakar Rally. So like at the beginning of the race, you have to decide like what spare parts you're going to take with you. And then literally it follows the path of the Paris-Dakar Rally from Paris to West Africa. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty cool game. Like I said, it's not a game you'd want to play now, but you can see that it got, basically good reviews back in the day. And so anytime somebody calls the game garbage or something, I don't really understand that. Next to that, though, is Dungeon Explorer. And you see it just got straight 7s. And that actually surprises me a little bit, because I think that Dungeon Explorer is one of the very best games on the TurboGrafx 16. I can't stand it when people compare this game to Gauntlet, because the only way that it's really similar to Gauntlet is the little enemy generators that it has. But even in here, it got compared to Gauntlet by 1, 2, 3 of the 4 reviewers. And like I said, to me, the game is more similar to like something like The Legend of Zelda. I mean, really, it's an adventure game. It's just that the enemies respawn by having these little generators. But the game's got awesome music, decent graphics, but really cool gameplay. And you can play multiplayer. I think you can play 5-player, because if you get a Turbo Tap, that gives you 5 controller inputs. And so that's pretty cool. I think there's like 8 different characters you can choose to play as. So even if you beat the game solo using, say, like the fighter, you can go play through the game again as like a bard or a mage. I can't recommend this game highly enough to anybody who has never played it. Then over here, we get into some Sega Genesis launch game reviews. We have Last Battle, which doesn't get horrible reviews. I mean, somebody gave it a 7. Ed gave it a 7. That's a little bit surprising. I've never really seen the appeal of Last Battle, especially when the gameplay is so similar to Altered Beast. Like, wouldn't you rather just play Altered Beast? And in fact, Steve even says, Last Battle reminds me of a souped-up version of Altered Beast. So, I don't know. It has some cool music in it, I'll give it that. But I found the gameplay to be pretty poor. Next to that is Tommy Lasorda Baseball. You see that one gets 2 8s and 2 7s. That's a really good baseball game. Like, I know not a lot of people now are into playing retro sports games, but I still find Tommy Lasorda Baseball to be a very playable game. In Japan, this was known as Super League Baseball. It only got a license for its North American release. And then last over here is Thunder Force 2, which you see gets 3 8s and a 7. And that's well-deserved. I mean, I would have given it probably a 9 personally, but Thunder Force 2, I would say, was probably the best game available at the Genesis launch. it is half overhead, like free roaming shooter, and then half side-scrolling shooter. So the original Thunder Force, which was released, I want to say on the MSX, I don't remember off the top of my head, was 100% top-down free roaming shooter. And then Thunder Force 2 was like 50-50 overhead and side-scrolling. And then Thunder Force 3 and 4 were both side-scrolling only. But it's kind of a shame because I like the top-down portions of this game, but they got rid of it. But definitely a really cool game to check out. So that's going to be it for reviews, and then we get into sort of these. I mean, I don't know if you want to call them they're like quick hits previews of games that are going to be coming out. Up here you've got Twin Eagle, which is a vertically scrolling shooter. It says based on the Taito coin op, but I thought Sega was the one that actually developed that game. But anyway, it's like another example of what I was talking about, where it's okay, but you play it and it just feels so like unpolished and full of flicker. I mean, to be fair, I think Gradius had its share of flicker as well. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the game's just not. These games are not that great for the most part. Next one down here you have is Willow, and I actually remember renting Willow for the NES when it came out, just because I liked the movie so much. It's a top-down adventure game. I guess maybe you could say it's sort of like a Zelda game. When I rented it, I didn't get the manual or anything, so I was really lost. It seemed like it was a decent game. It certainly has very nice graphics, but playing it as a 12-year-old with no manual, I felt like I was just wandering around, not knowing what to do. But playing it again as an adult, it seems actually pretty obvious what you're supposed to go around and do. So I guess I'll just chalk that up to me being a dumb kid. Down here is Silkworm, and this is a Tecmo arcade game. Silkworm is kind of an interesting game in that you can play so it's a side-scrolling shooter, and you can play as a helicopter, in which case obviously you're flying, or you can play as a Jeep, which will then, of course, drive along the ground. But you can also play the game two-player cooperative, where one player will be each vehicle, and that's pretty cool. I wouldn't call it a great shooter, but it's definitely not bad. And then down here, lastly, you have Ninja Gaiden 2. Over here, this is a multi-page ad for this Game Mania business, and the only reason I wanted to even point it out is I just thought it was interesting the way they grouped together all of the NES games by publisher. Like, I don't know why you would do that, but I guess you gotta group them together somehow, right? So like here, these are all Sunsoft games, and then down here are all Hudson Soft games. And, here's Bandai and Tenjin, and it keeps going on for a little bit. I think 2 more pages, yeah. Then we get into some quick hits previews for Master System games. So you see, like I said over here, they just say Sega. And, I don't know if they just didn't really refer to the Sega Master System as the Master System. I explained that in the launch video for the Master System, that it's actually the Sega system, and you could buy a base system or a Master System when you bought it. And that was referring to the 2 different bundles, but they chose to call it just Sega. First here you have Captain Silver, which is like a pirate-themed game. It's a side-scrolling action game, and you're like a pirate. I haven't played this game a whole heck of a lot, but from what I did play, it just seems really not good. And like they compare it to Castlevania, which I think is very, very misleading. The next one is Nightmare Basketball, which I don't know if that's a typo or if that's what it was called at one point, but it's actually called Basketball Nightmare. And the nightmare in it is because you're playing basketball against like monsters. But it's 5-on-5 basketball, which is, impressive for an 8-bit system. But what I thought was funny is that if you play the game, it has like slam dunk and layup animations, which it just seems like every basketball game around this time like had to have those animations, or like kids would be on the playground the next day saying like, oh, I got Basketball Nightmare. Oh, is it a cool game? Man, it doesn't even have slam dunk animations. Because I mean, it's just like Double Dribble or Pat Riley Basketball on the Genesis. But I don't know. The game seems like it's kind of okay. And then last is Dynamite Ducks, which again is not a game I played too terribly much, but what I did play of it just didn't make me want to play more. By the way, I don't believe that Basketball Nightmare came out in the US, although I think it might have come out in Canada, which seems kind of strange. So here's just the last 2 pages of Game Mania. So, I mean, this must have cost them a pretty penny to have a 4-page ad, but whatever. Now we get into some quick hits previews of Genesis games, and I like all 3 of these games. So Rambo 3 is actually, I would say, one of my favorite Genesis games. It is a third-person run-and-gun game, I guess, like Atari Warriors or Shock Troopers or Mercs. But obviously, it's based on the Rambo 3 movie. The only shortcoming I would say about the game is that there's no like 2-player cooperative play, because it is, of course, based on Rambo. So to have it be 2-player would be kind of nonsensical. But I like the game a lot. It's a really fun game. It's not really very hard. You should be able to easily, beat it within a couple of days of starting to play it. But I think it's a lot of fun. They don't have the screenshot here, but a famous screenshot that you see of this game is like between the first and second levels, there's kind of a boss battle, if you want to call it that, where Rambo has to use his explosive arrows to blow up a helicopter, and it just looks pretty cool. The next one is Forgotten Worlds, which it's funny, they say Sega's Forgotten Worlds, but Forgotten Worlds is actually a Capcom arcade game, which they actually even say here. But there were a lot of early Genesis games that were third-party IPs, but that Sega themselves programmed for the Genesis in-house. And I think Forgotten Worlds would fall into that category. And definitely a cool game. You can play 2-player cooperative. The main characters are kind of funny. They're both like these buff guys, like buff shirtless guys with like sunglasses and flat tops. But it's really a cool game. And then the last game down here is actually kind of a shame. So this is Super Hide-Lide. I've talked about the original Hide-Lide before, which was an NES release, although originally it was like an NEC PC 8801 game. And then in Japan, there was a Hide-Lide 2 that we never got. And then Super Hide-Lide is actually Hide-Lide 3. And it's an RPG, and I think that a lot of people kind of skip it because it has really bad graphics. It has cool music, but if you just turn it on, you're going to think, wow, this game looks terrible. And I think a lot of people would tend to skip it. But at least in my opinion, it's actually a very good game. It's got like some unique gameplay elements. Like it has a clock in the game. It's not a real-time clock, but there's a day-night cycle, and like your character has to have sleep and has to eat. Like you have to eat at least, I think, 2 meals a day. And then every night you want to like go to the inn and sleep. And if you don't, it has an adverse effect on your character. But anyway, I say it's a shame. Well, partially because I think people would skip it because of the bad graphics. But it even says here, Phantasy Star was undoubtedly the best-selling Sega Master System card of all time. While Phantasy Star 2 is set to debut for the Genesis sometime next year, Sega is determined to make sure RPG fans don't despair with Super Hide-Lide. And it's just kind of a shame because this might have been the kind of game that would have held people over until Phantasy Star 2 came out. But Phantasy Star 2 actually beat Super Hide-Lide to market. So, I think that created sort of an unfavorable comparison. On this side is an ad for Thundercade, which is another vertically scrolling shooter. Once again, just, not a top tier game, I would say. I guess the cool thing, if you want to call it that, about Thundercade, you're a motorcycle, and instead of getting like options, you get like sidecars for your motorcycle. And it kind of shows it here in the cover art that you've got like a sidecar over here with like a minigun in it. And I mean, that's kind of cool, but overall I would say the game is not great. We've got over here our Quarterman column, and for anybody that doesn't know, Quarterman was like, it says it here, gaming gossip. So a lot of the things that you'd read in Quarterman were not true, but some of them were. So like the first thing we'll talk about here talks about the Atari Lynx and some of the titles that are going to be coming out for it, like Gauntlet and Rampage, Electro Cop. And of course, those did end up coming out. Kind of the big story I would say in here is the third one. It says, Tengen struck out in their recent bid to maintain rights to their NES Tetris. Nintendo went directly to ELORG, the Russian Trade Commission, to obtain the rights to Tetris for their Game Boy handheld, and cheerfully learned that the home video game rights had not been snapped up. With difficulty stirring between the Big N and Tengen at the time, the lawyers at Nintendo certainly saw this as an opportunity to slap Tengen in the face. If you can find the NES Tengen version, buy it. It is far superior to the upcoming authorized version from Nintendo. And I just remember that. I remember as a kid around this time, like we knew that the Tengen version of Tetris on the NES was a rare game. And I even remember at one point being in some store, I don't know what store it was, and looking at all of the Tengen NES games, because I think they were in like a bargain bin or something. They weren't like behind glass. And I remember kind of flipping through them to see if there was a copy of Tetris, but it was of course far too late. Here's an ad for Star Soldier. Here it says that, it's by Taxan because it was published by Taxan. But Star Soldier was, of course, developed by Hudson Soft and is the first game in the Soldier series, which got 3 releases on the PC Engine, 2 of which came out for the TurboGrafx 16. And, once again, it's okay, but again, it just seems like a rough around the edges shooter on the NES. This section is called Behind the Screens. And as I said in the intro or at the beginning of the video, the Nintendo Game Boy had just come out. And so they, I guess, tried to get like some quotes from these different marketing executives from different third-party companies. And it's funny because so here's Acclaim, Capcom, Taito, Data East. And he said these first 4 people, like all 4 of them were like, yeah, we have a couple of games coming out for the Game Boy, but we can't say what they are. So they're really not even interesting quotes to have. This person from Konami does mention that they're going to have Castlevania The Adventure coming out under the Konami label, and then Motocross Maniacs coming out under the Ultra label. And so that's kind of cool. But then I kind of like the other thing this guy says. This guy was very forward thinking. We believe that the ultimate unit will probably be a handheld system that can also plug into your TV, which, does that remind you of the Nintendo Switch? And then this Liz Homburg from FCI mentions that they'll have Boxel coming out, which, Boxel's not a super exciting game, but I would say that it's a game that's very well suited to a handheld system. But then she says the Game Boy could very well be the Walkman of the 90s. And that's interesting to think about, because, the Game Boy was not super popular this early, like 89 and maybe into 90. But, as we all know, the Game Boy ended up absolutely taking off and being a smash hit for Nintendo. So could we call that the Walkman of the 90s? Maybe. On this side is an ad from Hudson, and they mention Adventure Island, Milan's Secret Castle, Bomberman, and the Adventures of Dino Riki. And once again, I've mentioned this before on the show, but here is the Joy-Card Sansui SSS controller, SSS standing for Stereo Simulator System. And that's because on the other end of the controller, like on the plug end of the cable, was a second plug, like an audio plug that you would attach to your NES's audio out. And this had some kind of, I assume, rudimentary headphone amplifier in it. And it says it does simulated stereo, so I don't know what that means. I don't know if it tried to do some kind of weird imaging in your headphones, or if it just means that it, piped the audio to both ears. Hopefully it's not the latter. But I've still never had one of these, and I would still like to find one, but they're not very common. They seem like they're more common in Japan, actually. This is kind of interesting. It says 32-bit system preview, and this is the FM Towns home computer system by Fujitsu. And I have never in my life seen an FM Towns. Of course, it never came out in the US, but there are people who have imported them from Japan, but I've never seen one. It seems very interesting. It's a fully MS-DOS compatible computer. It's based on a 386 processor, but from what I've read and what I've heard, there were a number of near perfect arcade ports that came out. In fact, down here, they're showing R-Type. I don't have any specific knowledge of the quality of the port of R-Type, but it just seems like it would be a really cool system to check out. Maybe not something I need to own necessarily, but, maybe at like a video game expo or something, it would be fun to play one. And then on the other side is an ad from Bandai. And the only one of these games I've ever really played is Bandai Golf Challenge Pebble Beach, which I had when I was a kid. This is the International Outlook section. And you can see that the first feature here is about the PC Engine. And it's interesting. Well, first of all, this is kind of cool. I mean, it shows the Japanese PC Engine here. But then you can see a few PC Engine games with their superior Japanese cover art, including, I don't know how well you can see this, but I'll throw it up on the screen. The cover art for the Japanese cover art for Vigilante just looks like, I don't even know what word to use, maybe grim. But, it's kind of disturbing, but also pretty awesome. And they talk here in this little inset box about the difference between the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx, which, as they say, there really aren't too many differences. They don't mention in here, I don't think, that, you can't play PC Engine Hue cards in your American TurboGrafx, but I believe that was talked about in the letters section. Something they really talk about in here, and I've mentioned this before on the show, that at this time, it was by no means a given that the Sega Genesis was going to be a hit and the TurboGrafx was not. And sort of the early word on the street about the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx 16 was that because the PC Engine was such a big hit in Japan and already had this huge library of games, it was going to be easy for NEC to bring more of those games to our shores. And so that, it might end up with the superior library. But, unfortunately, there were so many games that were left in Japan that didn't come out here that that kind of didn't end up being true. But, they mention in here that, relatively speaking, the Mega Drive was also a fairly new system in Japan compared to the TurboGrafx 16, that it just didn't have the library built up yet, period. And over here, they talk about the Connex system. So I don't know a whole lot about the Connex multi-system. It was being developed in the UK. At one point, it was being developed as a peripheral, and then they decided to develop it as its own video game system based around an 8086 processor. And it ended up getting completely canceled. So it never came out. And then down here in this box, they mentioned on the cover, you remember, first look at 16-bit Super Mario World. And unless I'm mistaken, I believe that this is your only look at 16-bit Super Mario World. And again, in case you can't see it, I'll try to blow this up and put it up on the screen. But this screenshot is not even from the final Super Mario World. I don't know if it's some kind of mock-up or from an early prototype. But, it does look pretty cool. Even in this blurry screenshot, you can see that it looks better, graphically speaking, than the NES. And then over here on this side, they say, during a press conference in July, Nintendo displayed the final version of their long-awaited and much-talked-about 16-bit Super system, the Super Famicom. And you can see that this is the final form factor of the Super Famicom and the controller, with the exception of the color of the power switch and the color of the buttons on the controller. And I think I'm kind of glad they changed the color of the buttons, because the red doesn't look that great. As I think most people do, I do prefer the look and the color scheme of the Japanese and European consoles versus what we got here. But yeah. Here, if you want, you can enter to win a Game Boy. I don't remember if the card is in here. There's like a reader response card, and you could fill it out and win yourself a Game Boy. Over here is an ad for the Acclaim wireless infrared remote controller. We've seen this ad before, and I've mentioned before. I actually had this controller, not when I was a kid, but maybe like 15 years ago. And it's really not a bad controller. But of course, these days, if you want a wireless controller for an NES, there are modern solutions so that you don't have to use something that is infrared based. Oh, Acclaim. So these are all Acclaim ads. Here's WWF WrestleMania, which, I haven't really played that much, so I don't have much to say about it. I'll just point out that down here, they mention not only the NES game, but also an LCD handheld game. So that's kind of neat. And then on the other side is Othello, which, this is not the kind of game I would have ever been into, but I also just kind of wonder what percentage of EGM's readership was going to see Othello and get excited. If you want to subscribe to EGM, $20 for 12 issues. Speaking of Life Force, there is a screenshot from it, as well as a screenshot from the first Phantasy Star. And I'm not sure what that's a screenshot of, but it looks pretty neat. Looks too high resolution to be a home console game from this time. On the other side, though, is an ad for Super Dodgeball. And I know I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again just because I like this game so much. This is a super fun game. The first time you play it, you will be turned off by how bad the flicker is in this game. But it's so fun that you will cease noticing the flicker within about 60 seconds, I would say. But if you've never played Super Dodgeball, check it out. Now we get into the cover story here, the game of the month. Of course, Ghouls N Ghosts on the Genesis. And I mentioned this, of course, in the Genesis in 1989 video, but Ghouls N Ghosts was just the second game released for the Genesis post-launch. So you had your 6 launch titles, and then World Championship Soccer and Ghouls N Ghosts came out like right on top of each other. And what a great game to come out so quickly for the Genesis. Like, this game finds itself on many people's lists of their favorite Genesis games, including me, as well as Corey over at My Life in Gaming. And this is sort of like, I guess you could call it a walkthrough of just the first 2 levels. It's kind of cool the way it's all stitched together like this, because this was before the days where you could like digitally take, capture screenshots of video games. Like, these are actual photographs of the screen that somebody cut out by hand and put together, which is pretty cool. And it's showing you between up here and down here the entire first level, and then here is the first level boss, this guy who kind of has his head. Is his head on his hand? And I just never really noticed that. I don't really know. That's kind of weird. But yeah, and then on the second set of pages here, you have the exact same thing for level 2, and including the boss. And I kind of like that. Like, they don't really spoil the game. Like, I just did a read through over on my other channel where they showed like the first 4 boss battles of I think it was Star Peroger, and just like, why would you ruin that for the player? In fact, I don't think they should even show the first 2 bosses here, but that's not as bad. And then down here they have a couple of rando screenshots from later on in the game. But just what an awesome game. And like I said about Forgotten Worlds, this was a Capcom arcade game, but the Genesis version was programmed in-house by Sega. I mean, I think by now it's common knowledge for most people that this game was the lead programmer for this Genesis version was Yuji Naka, who of course went on to create the Sonic the Hedgehog series. Here's Tricks of the Trade, which these are just like tips and a lot of codes, either like not so much cheat codes, I guess I would say, but like continue codes that you could punch into some of these games. There's the original Hide Lied, as I mentioned earlier, Strider, some cool codes for Tecmo Bowl, like to help advance you in the game a little bit in Tecmo Bowl, Super Mario Brothers 2, Metal Gear. And I think it goes on, but first we have this ad in the middle of the magazine for, and I don't know about this ad, man. So this is the Ultimate Game Club. And if you read the print here, you have to pay $10 to be like a club member, and then you can buy the things that are in here. And they say they give you 20% off every Nintendo game and accessory. But if you read some of the prices in here, it seems like they're kind of lying about the original price of some of the items. Like for instance, right here is the Sega Genesis, and they're saying list price $199, club price $189. $189 was the price of the Genesis for everybody. But they've got some cool stuff in here to look at. Like here's the original How to Win at Nintendo Games by Jeff Rovin. I think I might have every single Jeff Rovin book, video game book anyway. I'm not quite positive. Here's some hats. They've got quite a few options for storing your NES games. Down here, you can probably barely see it, is this wooden, what it's calling a cartridge cabinet. I actually have that. And then over here, they've obviously got a bunch of games, NES games here, Genesis games up here, Sega Master System over here. And then this is kind of interesting. For some reason, they're selling quite a few VHS tapes. These VHS tapes would have like, tips for games, or, maybe some of them might have previews for upcoming games. But these two tapes are by Kodak. And I thought, well, gee, that's kind of weird, like that Kodak was putting out NES game tapes. And I actually took a picture of this part of the ad and sent it to Corey, and he said he actually has one of those tapes. Here is this Eclectics Pro Play Home Arcade. I've mentioned that one before. I have a very specific memory of seeing this for sale at Toys R Us on like an end cap. Here are some more tricks of the trade. Rampage. Tecmo Bowl invisibility code. Not invincibility, although that wouldn't make that much sense for a football game. But it says to play Tecmo Bowl with characters who are completely invisible, enter this code. Why would you want to do that? Well, I went ahead and did it, and all it did for me was create a buggy mess, so maybe I don't have the right ROM revision. And, here's a tip for Keith Courage and Alpha Zone, secret debug mode. So, I don't know, I guess that's kind of neat. And then check out this kid over here. So I don't know what Homer's is. It says it's in Omaha, Nebraska. Is it only in Omaha, Nebraska? I don't know. But, this kid's got some Converse All-Stars on and some acid wash jeans with a hole in them. Like, that would make him pretty cool. But I think, a little bit overboard here at the top with the Nintendo sweatshirt and hat. Those are kind of cool sunglasses, though. And then this Z bag, you can barely see it. This Z bag is something you'll see for sale often in these magazines in ads for companies like the Ultimate Video Game Club that were selling accessories. It was supposed to be like a padded carrying case for your NES. Like, oh, if you're going to go spend the night at your friend's house, you can put your NES in this Z bag. Here is a similar to what we saw for Ghouls and Ghosts. here's a feature for POW. And apparently, I mean, I don't believe I have issue number 3, but from what they're saying here, it sounds like this is a continuation of a feature that was in issue number 3. And it's just, once again, it's a walkthrough of the game using these stitched together photos. And, this game, I've talked about this game before in a magazine read through. POW is an SNK game, by the way. This is a great game for the NES, but it's a good thing. I'm not complaining, but this game is like highly underappreciated in that you can still buy this game on eBay for $10 shipped all day long. Like, there are a ton of copies of this game up on eBay. It's a beat 'em up game, similar to Double Dragon or Streets of Rage, but it sort of takes place in sort of the same kind of world as like RAMBO. In this jungle setting. You can pick up weapons though, like you can pick up even like a machine gun, as well as like knives and whatnot. Easily, in my opinion, one of the best beat 'em up games on the NES. And it goes on over here, showing you, I don't know, what is this, like levels 3 and 4, I think they said. Yeah. And then we get into, so there's all of these like mini features of like, here's some stuff going on with Nintendo, and then later we'll see some other consoles. But here, the main thing that they're talking about with Nintendo ignores 16-bit in 1989. I mean, that's not entirely fair because, as we already saw, Nintendo unveiled the Super Famicom in 1989. So like, they didn't really ignore it. They just weren't going to have a system coming out. But the two things here that are kind of interesting is that, once again, they mention Tetris, and they say, now that Nintendo has scored the first punch in the battle for the rights to the Soviet-designed puzzle game Tetris, it appears that the more playable and in-depth Tengen version will be removed from store shelves. And just for anybody that doesn't know, you can play Tetris 2-player, the Tengen version, and you can't with the Nintendo version. And then I thought this was very interesting. They don't say what this is. The photo caption just says, you won't see the Nintendo 16-bit Super Famicom, which plays highly detailed carts like Super Mario World and Zelda 3 until around this time next year, or maybe even later. But much like the Super Mario World screenshot was not, actually what ended up being the game, this appears to be a very early screenshot from some sort of early version of Pilot Wings, and it looks quite a bit different. So that's pretty interesting. And then over here, I talked about Hide-Lide, so here you go. Here's an ad for Hide-Lide. Interestingly, in the Sega Genesis in 1990 video, when I mentioned Hide-Lide, I said something to the effect of it being a poor port or something. And somebody rightfully corrected me in the comments and said, actually, it's a very good port. It's just a really old game. But once again, I would say if you can get past sort of the very simple presentation, it's actually not a bad game. Okay, here we go with Bad Dudes. So, of course, they reviewed it, but then this is like, I've always thought of these fact files as being more like in-depth previews, but I guess not really. It's just more of like a in-depth showcase. And like I said before, I don't think much of Bad Dudes. I mean, Bad Dudes, I guess, is famous for the screen that you get right before the game starts, where there's that dude with the blonde flat top and the glasses who looks straight out of Forgotten World, who says something like, the president has been kidnapped by ninjas. Are you a bad enough dude to rescue him or whatever? And I mean, to me, that's the most memorable part of the game. Like I said, I just don't think it's that great. This feature, at least, it gives the game some praise. Here at the end, it says, if you're a fan of side-scrolling punch-outs, then Bad Dudes won't disappoint. It captures the same elements found in the arcade and wraps them up into a fine-looking and well-executed NES cartridge. Well, I mean, that's your opinion, man. But next, here is a game that's great, and that is River City Ransom. Interestingly, maybe I'm not thinking of another game, but for me at least, I would say that POW and River City Ransom are the two best beat 'em up games on the NES. And I mean, I think I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know. I mean, River City Ransom is a very well-regarded game. Here's Twin Cobra from Sammy, published by Sammy. I don't know who programmed this version. Twin Cobra is another Toaplan game, and in the arcade, Twin Cobra is the sequel to Tiger Heli. But, you know, once again, the game's not bad. You know, like none of these shooters I'm talking about in this issue are like bad. They're just, you know, you're going to play them and think, well, you know, I'd probably rather play Gradius or Life Force, but you know, it's okay. And then, over here, if you need a hint book for Ultima Exodus, then you can order one. Well, probably not anymore, but that would have been kind of cool. Then we get into the Sega Masters section. So, you know, like we had the Nintendo section. Now we're into the Sega, I think it's Master System only section. First here is spotlighting the new Sega RPGs. And here's Miracle Warriors. I have never played Miracle Warriors. I don't know anything about it. Next is Spellcaster, which of course they reviewed in this issue. Down here is Ultima 4. And Ultima 4 is an interesting thing because here you have an American RPG that in this case was converted, if you want to say, for the Master System by Sega of America, but then only released in Europe and Brazil. And interestingly, this version of Ultima 4 looks a lot more like the Japanese home console releases on like the NEC PC-88, MSX, PC-98. Not exactly, but Ultima 4 for the Master System is a clear visual upgrade over what we got here on like the Apple II, Commodore 64, and Amiga, partially because it's just a newer game. And then ironically, the console version that we did get was on the NES. And then you had, again, an American RPG being localized and maybe even kind of redeveloped by a Japanese game developer so that it would be better suited for their home audience. And then that version was translated back into English and released here in the United States. And then, of course, over here is Phantasy Star, which is easily one of the best Master System games ever made. But I also wanted to talk about the game over here, and that is Scramble Spirits. And this was a Sega arcade game on the Sega System 24, which is not necessarily more powerful than the System 16, but is capable of more high-resolution graphics. And it's a pretty cool game, the arcade game. And, you know, it's not really reasonable to expect that the Sega Master System would get like a faithful arcade port, but it's not bad. Like, this game is certainly no worse than any of the other shooters for the NES that got covered in this issue. Unfortunately, Scramble Spirits ended up not coming out in the United States for the Master System. It came out in, you know, like Japan, Europe, and I think in Brazil. And it's weird because you can see available December of '89. So, I mean, the game, you know, you can imagine that this issue was probably written in August and September. So it must have been a last minute decision not to release it here. And I'm really not sure why, because like I said, it's actually a good game. This game, on the other hand, Dead Angle. So Dead Angle, I don't know, would you call that a rail shooter? Dead Angle is very similar gameplay wise to like Operation Wolf. Like the screen, you know, scrolls to one side and there's like enemies popping onto the screen from the sides or popping out of buildings. And you have like this aiming reticle that you move around the screen with your D-pad and, you know, then press the button to shoot. But for whatever reason, Dead Angle is not compatible with the Sega Light Phaser. And, you know, just imagine, you know, say what you want about Operation Wolf for the NES as far as it being a bad port, but at least it had support for the Light Zapper or the NES Zapper. So I don't get that decision at all. We actually have a little bit of Atari coverage, Atari Adventure, they call it. They mention the Atari 7800 and the Atari XE game system, which were both being, still being supported by Atari. And they mention that the game that came out, I guess simultaneously for both, is this game Xenophobe. Xenophobe was a Bally Midway arcade game. I don't remember ever seeing Xenophobe in my local arcades, and I've never played this home version, so I really can't comment. But over here is a feature on the links. They interview Dave Needle and RJ Michael, if that's how you say his name, and those were the two guys who developed the links. I don't remember exactly what their backstory was. I don't know if they were Epic's employees, because originally the Lynx was supposed to be developed by Epic's and sold as an Epic's piece of Epic's hardware, but it ended up being produced by Atari instead, with Epic's developing a lot of the games for it, including the pack-in game, California Games. But basically they just they're asking them a lot of questions about the game, or about the system rather. About, sort of its dimensions and what the screen is like, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you were somebody that was maybe considering buying a Lynx in late 89, this would be a cool article for you to read. Then we get into the turbo section, which they call Turbo Champ, which I don't know. I don't really like that name, but whatever. And, Turbo Graphics explodes with games. And they talk about some of the launch games here. Pac-Land, of course, was not a launch game, but here you have Power Golf. They just say Final Lap. Of course, it was Final Lap Twin, and Blazing Lasers. And then they have this sort of thing here. There's still time to prepare your nervous system for, the higher energy video game system is what they would say at the ends of the commercials. TurboGrafx 16, the higher energy video game system, which I don't know what that really means, but whatever. But, and here, look, they even show the Turbo CD attachment. And there's Fighting Street, which is a terrible, terrible game. Galaga 90, Sidearms, Deep Blue, also not a good game. R-Type, but see, look already, already with the shooters. So that's awesome. And then they do a couple of, these deep dives. The fact file here, here's Dungeon Explorer, which, I already talked about, so I don't really know what else to say. Just, once again, awesome game. And then here's a 2-page spread for Blazing Lasers. And, it really still to this day, when I play this game, it blows my mind that it was a launch game, because Blazing Lasers is not the best vertically scrolling shooter on the system, but maybe the second best. And sort of a fun fact that I just recently learned. It was just on Wikipedia. It wasn't like something I had to dig for. Superstar Soldier was almost called Blazing Lasers 2, because they even realized while they were developing Superstar Soldier how similar it was to Blazing Lasers. And something I've seen people talk about sometimes online is whether or not, is Blazing Lasers like part of the Soldier series. But what's interesting is, they show it in the screenshot here, but I'll just show it in some gameplay footage. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you have the score, and then under that, you have these little triangles. And that's because you can adjust the speed of your ship using the select button. And Superstar Soldier has the exact same thing in it. So, whether or not you want to say Blazing Lasers is like officially part of the series or not, it's the kind of thing where, if you like the Soldier series, you should check out Blazing Lasers. I mean, there's just a certain sort of pedigree there, I guess. I don't know what other word to use. I mean, you could call Blazing Lasers like the predecessor of the 16-bit Soldier games. I don't know how else to put it, but again, it's just a really good game. It's got good music, it's got great graphics, and just spot-on gameplay. Outpost Genesis. Kind of interestingly, this is supposed to be a feature about the Genesis, but they're actually using it to talk about the power base converter, which of course allows you to play Master System games on your Genesis. But that really wasn't important, in my opinion, peripheral, because if you were somebody that was maybe thinking about upgrading, like you already had a Master System, you were thinking about buying a Genesis, this would allow you to maybe hang on to some of your favorite Master System games and then sell off your system and the rest of the games to help fund the purchase. And they mention in here that the power base converter was supposed to come out in December for a price of $39.99. I don't recall if the power base converter actually made it out in time for Christmas or not. And here is yet another ad for a VHS tape of secret strategies and codes for Nintendo compatible games from Fusion Video. I don't know who that is. Here is a feature on Thunder Force 2. It says here Thunder Force 2 MD. I've never tried playing the Japanese version of Thunder Force 2. I don't know if it still has that there or if this is an early build. But, well, I guess it wouldn't be a preview because this game was out already. It's a fact file, sorry. But just, again, I already talked about Thunder Force 2, but just an absolutely great game. Game Boy Club, here to talk about going head-to-head with the Video Link. I have still never done that. I really want to try playing a two-player Game Boy game with somebody. Here they're showing baseball. They mentioned Tetris, tennis, and baseball are the first games to use the Video Link peripheral. Over here they show Alleyway. I don't know, was Alleyway a launch game? I think it was. Alleyway is just like Arkanoid or, a breakout title. And then down here is Boxel, which got mentioned earlier. And then here they mention a few Game Boy titles still on the way. There's Castlevania The Adventure, Golf, F1, Motocross Maniacs, NFL Football. I had that game. I hated it. Shanghai, I have that game. I actually like it. So this is just like continuations of some of the other articles. This is a continuation of the Atari Lynx article. Here they're showing a few screenshots, though. There's California Games, which was, of course, the pack-in. Great game. Electro Cop, I've never played. But, yeah, the Lynx got a version of Rampage, and it's a very decent version of the game. Here's a continuation of the TurboGrafx 16 feature, talking about some of the other games. There's Military Madness, World Court Tennis, JJ and Jeff, Fighting Street, Darius, which I don't think any of the Darius games ever came out in the US. Did they? I'm not positive about that. Here's the top score clubs. This is reminiscent of the high score table that you would see in like Nintendo Power, except in this case it seems like it's mostly, if not completely, members of the US national video game team. So like you see Steve Harris's name is in here multiple times. Don Nauert, that was his last name, Nauert. That was also one of the reviewers. Steve Rhino's in there multiple times. So I don't know. It just seems a little bit more like self-congratulatory for guys that are basically working for EGM to be just putting their own high scores in the back, but whatever. Electronic Gaming top 10 games as of July 1st of 89. And I point that out because that's why you don't see any of these new systems being represented here. You just have NES, Master System, Atari, and arcade. These are always fun to look at just to see like what was hot like in the summer of 89. So like for the NES, you have Mega Man 2, Ninja Gaiden, Super Mario Brothers 2, Guerrilla War. Surprised to see Guerrilla War at number 4, but it's not a bad game. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. For Sega, of course, Phantasy Star is the number 1 game. Rampage, the Master System version of Rampage, is definitely not bad. These Atari games, I don't think I've ever played any of these Atari games. Tower Toppler, Ace of Aces, I don't even know what that is. Arcade games, number 1, Hard Drivin'. I remember I shouldn't say we, but kids my age loved Hard Drivin' in the arcades because it was the closest you were going to get to driving an actual car. And I get that it wasn't that close, but compared to other games, like when I was growing up, I loved playing like Pole Position in the arcade, but like that didn't replicate the experience of driving a car like at all. But, Hard Driving', you actually sat in it. The steering wheel had weight, and I think it had force feedback, if I remember correctly. It just, unfortunately, it cost like $1 to play that game. Here's an ad, if you want to call it that, for Electronic Gaming Monthly Top Score, Video Game Tricks, Codes, and Strategies. I've never seen one of those. That seems like it must have been some sort of like, supplementary issue or something, if you want to call it that you could buy off of newsstands, or as you can see here, you can just order it through the mail. This, I don't know how long they kept this up for, this game over. This is just showing you like the endings of some games, Gyrus, Guerrilla War, Super Mario Brothers 2, because famously Nintendo tried to sort of explain away why the game was so much different by saying that, Mario was just like having a dream. And then here's an ad for Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf. This one's for Dad, too. I guess that's true. Not a bad game. The thing I remember about Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf is that the swing meter just moves really, really fast. And that kind of killed it for me. And then on the back cover is just an ad for Bishu joysticks, which generally speaking are not very good. So that is EGM issue number 4 from November of 1989. Interestingly, the reason that I chose to do this issue is that originally I wanted to do a magazine read through and have it out for Halloween. And I had picked an issue and everything. It was a October issue of Game Pro from a different year. The cover story was like spooky games or whatever. And it just seemed like it had some like really good Halloween vibe to it. But I started reading through the magazine, and aside from a couple of games, like from the main feature, like it had Castlevania 3, which of course is awesome. Most of the games in the issue were just like, it was just mediocrity after mediocrity and it just would have been a boring read through. Like even if the games were like truly bad, that's something exciting to talk about, but just mediocre games are just boring. So that's why I didn't end up doing that issue. And then I pulled this one out of a box and thought like, ooh, that would make a good Halloween issue. But by then it was kind of too late and I wasn't going to get it out in time. So I spent my time making videos for the other channel instead. But hopefully this will be the first of a number of magazine read-throughs that I have coming out. I know I haven't really been uploading to this channel for a few months. I promise the channel is not dead. I just kind of haven't been in the right mindset to make these videos lately. So, yeah, I feel like I'm back and ready to make content. So I have a small stack of other magazines that I cannot wait to do read-throughs of. I think I got some pretty exciting stuff coming out. So keep your eyes peeled. So that's going to do it for this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.